All right, we're back, and it is COMP125. It's week 10, part 2 of our broadcast here in the summer 2016 semester at Centennial, client-side web development with JavaScript. And we just finished opening up using an XHR request to open up a JSON file, and here's our address book, okay? So I'm not going to mess with this yet. Let's take a look at how we did that. So again, we have a few steps we talked about. Let me break this down into your steps. So step 1, we make this XML HTTP request, okay? And if I was going to go refer back to your PowerPoint here, it actually breaks it down into a few easy steps way up here, right? When I talked about what those 4 steps are, right? Before the status codes and all that stuff, like way up here. I said these are the 4 steps, and let's see where they are. Format, start line. I think I made it way back here. And the reason why I put those steps in play is because I want you to remember what you need to do. The XHR XML HTTP request is the first thing you do. You make that object, right? And I just want to follow those steps without messing you guys up. Yeah, well, somewhere up there. Yeah, it's way up there. So that's the first thing we do. The second thing is let's put it in the order that we did it. Let me ask you this question. Can I move this piece somewhere else? This open on ready state change? Does it have to be in this order? Remember, it's just an event, right? So can't I do one of these and move it to the bottom, right? Here's my on the bottom stuff, and I'll save everything. And if I move this in order, and if I refresh, do I still get the answer? The answer is yes, right? So I don't have to put it in this thing. And I think, to me, this is the steps that I would do it. I would say this. This is step 2. Step 2. This is step 3, which is you need this. These are all things you need for the JSON stuff to work. By the way, for your next assignment, you're going to use your JSON. You're going to create a JSON file with all the data you put into your mini portfolio site, right? You're going to load it into a JSON format, and you're going to load all your data that you hard-coded in your mini portfolio in a file, load it up, and spit it out into your website. Okay, so you're loading it from a file into objects, and then from there onto your website. Paragraphs is what we're talking about. All your paragraph data is being put back into things from JSON, right? And this is step 4. We'll put it here, step 4. So let's describe these steps in a little more detail because I think you need to know that. So again, step 1 would be create your object. Create XHR object. That's the first step. Step 2. Right? You make an open request, right? Open request. Right? And that includes the type of request you're making, whether it's a get or a post, a put or a delete. Typically, we do a get, right? And the URL path relative to the index.html file where the app.js file is linked to, right? In this particular case, index is and the root, and we have to go into scripts addressbook.json to get it. If you want to use async, and my recommendation is, yes, use async, right? Because we don't want to wait. I don't want to wait for somebody else's request to finish before I get my answer back, all right? Then do an XHR send request. Send request, right? Finally, step 4, wait for the file to load, right? And you want to do this inside this object. Now, there's different ways of writing this object. We did it in an anonymous object, right? But we talked about functions, anonymous functions, right? I could also do this function as a separate function, a name function, something like, I'm just putting it out there to you, right? A function that does something like, hey, send the response data out, right? That kind of thing, right? So I want to do something like, I want to print this console.log in another function. Let's just take this whole function, right, and make it into our own. So we're going to call this thing the, display on console function, display address info to console, right? We're going to make this in a second. Maybe we should make it like one thing. What do you think? Display address info to console. Woo! It's a big long one, right? Okay, so this is our actual name function, and what are we going to do? We're going to take all this information here. We're going to still do the check, and we're going to put it in here. We can make this a named function as opposed to anonymous. And instead of us doing this step, we can just point it to display display address address info to console. That's okay too. And if you want to check that, right, this is step like I said, this is step 4, right? Step 4, right? And if I was to save that and go back, what happened? XHR is not defined. Well, let's take a look at that and see what happened, right? Well, here I define my XHR object inside my function, right? This is a problem. So what I want to do is take this away, right? And up here inside function scope, functional scope, right? I want to say var XHR, right? Now, you might think that's bad, but that's the way it works, right? Why? Because inside my function, the scope of this XHR object is limited to my function, this function here and it. Yes?
So you said that sometimes the scope leaks out also.
It does, but right now we're inside of an IFI, right? No scope leak. Can't access this stuff right now, right? Okay, so that's number 1. So we can make it like this, a named function. So we can use, I'll say we can use a named function instead. Named function instead of an anonymous function. We can do that, right? And the reason why I want to point this out is sometimes we do that. Sometimes we put it up into its own function, and then we display address info to console. That would be the function that we're doing, right? By the way, that's not the function we're going to use. We want to take that address info and put it inside of objects for ourselves, right? We want to put it into an array of objects we can use, right? Okay. So that's the one thing we can do. Also, the way this is written, on ready state change, this is not the one I want to write it like. Let's rewrite this. I'll put this down here. I'll say xhr dot add event listener, and we want to listen for what type of event, which is going to be the ready state change event. Ready state change event. And then from there, I want to look at display address info, display address to console, whatever it is. There we go. Let's see if we can do this. And we're just going to copy. We're just going to comment this one out. Can I do it this way? I can. Right? Remember what I said to you, that I prefer this methodology as opposed to on something. I don't prefer this methodology. I prefer this. This is clearer. So I'm making an event listener. I'm listening for ready state change. When my ready state changes, I want to respond with a callback function. The callback function is up here. Right? So let's get rid of this. So I'm going to get rid of this and put this over here. This is step 4. Okay? And what I'm doing with step 4 is really waiting for everything to load. We're waiting for everything to be okay. Right? All right. Now this is a really long method, but this is the steps you need to take for your assignment number 3. Right? You need to create your object. You need to open up the file, right, for the particular page. And you might have to do this multiple times. Why? Because each of your pages, index, contacts, about, might have different paragraphs you put in for your mini portfolio site. Remember? So that when you get your details for your assignment, that's what you need to do. Take those things, and instead of loading them from inside of your hard-coded arrays and strings, I want you to take it from the file. That'll make this function properly. Now you might say, well, why would I do that? Because typically what we use in this particular case when we do an XML or AJAX request, we're actually doing is we're loading it from a data file, from data. We're getting data, and we're simulating getting data from a database. Right? That's what it's like. Okay. Cool, so I'm loading the data that I've got here. And if you notice, I've got all the data that I've got, but it's all in string type format. So if I was to do something with it, so let's say, for example, let's not pump it out to the address, and let's say instead of display address info to console, we're just going to read the data. All right, that's what we're going to call read data into stuff. So we're just going to call this the read data function. So I'm going to rename this thing. I'll right click. I rename my symbol and to read data. Right, that's the read data. So When my ready state change is on ready state change, read my data. And make sure that my ready state is 4, right? And ready state 4 means, I'll put a comment here that says, ready state 4 means what? Data loaded. Okay. And what's the other one is? Status 200 is everything is okay. Right? So data loaded and everything is okay. You got to check for both of those conditions to make sure that you can do something with your response text. Okay, here's the other thing. Now that I have this string of data, I want to convert it into something that I can use, right? So remember what I can do with it is I know that this response text is just string. So let me go back, get rid of this console. And let's hover over this to see what it is. So if I go this, I can look at it and say it's any, right? Because response text, because XHR, I don't in the global scope, I don't know what it is. No, I know here it's a HTTP request type. I know that this is going to be a string of data, right? That's what it is, right? So if it's a string, I can't do much with it. Can I then convert it somehow into data, right? So I need to use a parse. That's what I want to do, a parse. And I want to JSON, right? I refer you back to the PowerPoint we did last week, right? In week 9, we did. This is where I want to end with this thought until we get back next class, okay? Because I want you to think about how to do this, right? So here's my week 9. And at the end of week 9, last week, we talked about some ways of parsing data, right? Well, here's my new user, right? And my new user, as an example, it's a string of data. Okay, great. Now that I've got my new user as a string of data, I want to JSON.parse this user, the string, so that it becomes actual stuff I can use. So this is what I need to do. And that's going to be my new user object. Let's check this out. Let's try this out. So I'm going to call this, just to do the same thing, we're going to make a local thing called address book. Var address book. Right? Here's my address book. And that's going to be equal to, right, JSON.parse. And we're going to put in xhr.responseText inside there to convert the stuff we get from our file into our address book. And let's see what we get back with our address book. I'm going to do a console.log now, console.log. I can spell console properly. Of our address book and see what the difference is now after we've converted it. So save. And if I go back to my file over here, and now I'm getting an object back. I'm absolutely not getting what I got before, right? Which was just a string. And if you notice, its address book is an array of data objects. And that, my friends, is the way you can convert stuff that you get back from JSON into an object you can use on the back end. That's what we want to do. We want to use JSON.parse to convert it, right? Okay. Let's go back and do one more thing before we do that. Well, if this is true, right, then I can skip through each of these things because it's an array of objects, right? Array of objects. Okay. And if I want to access the first object of my array, right, I can simply do something like address book 0. And now that is giving me the data back from that object. Now, if you notice, I'm going to get undefined. Why? Because address book 0, although I want to get something back from this, right, just to show you something, right, it's an object. I got to be very careful here what I'm getting. My address book is the top level object. Inside my address book, I have an array, right? Let's go back and take those things away because you're going to be tricked, right, if I don't show you this thing. So here's my address book. My address book points to an array of 5, right? And inside my address book, there's an actual address book. How do I access this data? Address book of array, an array of 5 elements, right? Do I have to do something like this? Address book dot address book, right? What if I do this? Do I get something there? Yes. I get an array of objects. Okay, that's good. And that means that my name, address book, right, is not the proper thing to use it's an object, right? So contact, we'll call this, let's say we'll rename this address book into contact. So rename, just to make it more realistic. Contact. So contact is equal to, or contacts, let me rename this again. Contacts, so at contacts, here's our address book, our contacts in our address book, and I want to look at the address book element number 0 is how you access it, this. And now if you notice, I get my object, which is Tom Tsiopoulos, and my email, tom@example.com. So you have to be very careful how you access this object, all right? It's not just what you think. Because I've written my file, and this is important too, right? I've written my file like this, and let me show you what my file is. Here's my address book.json. It's an array of objects called address book. Okay, what if I change my address book to contacts, right? An array of objects called contacts, and now I'm still getting my response. Let me just go back here. And if I go back, I've resaved this thing. And I'm going to go back to my file. And let's say, instead of my address book, I'm going to call this address book. So I'm going to rename this my variable, which makes more sense to me, right? Rename symbol to address book. My address book of contacts, right? That makes more sense. And my contacts 0 is what I want, right? Here's my contact 0. If I refresh, you can see that I'm going to still get that back, right? Okay, that makes more sense, right? So address book is an object that contains an array of contacts. That makes more sense to me than, contacts is an array. It is an object that contains an array of address books. Now, it doesn't make any sense to me, right? So that's my contacts. So if this makes more sense, right? My address book contacts, right? Well, that means that I can go through my object, right? My contacts, I can assign that as an array to something else, right? And sometimes what we do is we want to try and create variables that make sense. So, for example, my address book is my object, and my contacts, right? My contacts then would be my address book equivalent to my address book.contacts, right? Well, if that's true, contacts is equal to address book contacts, I can go through a list of my contacts by just doing one of these. So contact 0. Notice I still get that back, right? Because I'm saying, hey, contacts is a variable that refers to my contacts array that's inside my address book object. That's what it is. Okay, cool. But if that's true, and if I want to print out every contact at once, one after the other, I can use what we've seen before last week, just as here's a simulation. I can use a for each loop, right? And I can say, well, my array, right, is my contacts array. Right, contacts array. And for every contact in contacts, right, for every contact in contacts, I want to show me the contact, right? Console log every contact in contacts. Well, if that's true, then I can not only assign it to the console, but I can assign it to an object that I want to create so I can access both properties. And now, my friends, when we come back next time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an object, just like we did last time, which we're going to make a contact object with 2 properties, the name and email address, and we're going to load up that contact, and I'm going to have stuff to do with that contact. I can create a contact with as an object that's based on a class. We're going to make a contact class. Yes? The what? Yeah, it's going to be the way you do it. We'll want to give you an example of that next day. I'll talk about that. Okay? Let's save this thing. Hold on.